Okay. That music ended a little bit faster than I thought it would. Hey, Salty. Hey, Crimson. How are you guys doing? Oh, once. Okay. Both of you are doing okay. But we are going to be possibly finishing Prince Ricardo tonight. I don't know how much longer it's going to take to do that one. Let's see, we're at chapter 6. How many pages? I'm doing pretty good today. One second. Okay. Okay, we've got around 50 pages of Prince Ricardo. We might be able to get that done tonight. That means we get the Gold Infinity next week. Everyone, feel free to relax. If you just want me on in the background, by all means, this is a great channel to lurk in. Try not to startle anyone too much with random voices. But at least it'll be better than last night, where I had 4 songs that I sung. I stopped before I got to the 5th one. This book, I don't think there's going to be any songs in. Thank goodness. Unless I don't remember seeing any listings for songs. No, I do not see any songs in this book. Good. Of course, I don't know what I'm going to read after this one. Guess I will have to search my library and see what comes up. But feel free, settle back, relax, and we'll get into the stories. Stories, since this chapter is one story now. Chapter 7, Ricardo's Repentance. The Queen, as it happened, fortunately, was lunching with one of the ladies of her court. Ricardo did not come down to luncheon, and Jaqueline ate hers alone, and very mournfully she felt. The prince had certainly not come well out of the adventure. He had failed, as all his attempts to restore the Stuarts always did. He had been wounded, though he had never received a scratch in any of his earlier exploits. And if his honor was safe, the good intentions fully understood, that was chiefly due to Jaqueline and to the generosity of King James and Prince Charles. I wonder what he's doing, she said to herself, and at last she went up and knocked on Ricardo's door. Go away, he said. I don't want to see anybody. Who is it? It's only me, Jaqueline. Go away. I want nobody. Do let me in, dear Dick. I have good news for you, said the princess. What is it? Said Ricardo, unlocking the door. And why do you bother a fellow so? He had been trying. His hand obviously hurt him badly. He looked, and indeed he was, very sulky. How did you get to England, Dick? asked the princess, taking no notice of his bandaged hand. Oh, don't ask me, said Ricardo. I've not been to England at all. Why, what happened? Everything that is horrid happened, said Dick, and then, unable to keep it any longer to himself, he said, I've failed to keep my promise. I've been insulted. I've been beaten by a fellow younger than myself. And oh, how my hand does hurt. And I've got such a headache. What am I to say to my mother when she asks why my arm is in a sling? And what will my father say? I'm quite broken down and desperate. I think I'll run away to sea. And indeed, he looked very wild and miserable. Tell me how it all happened, Dick, said the princess. I'm not sure it's not how bad as you make it out. Perhaps I can help you. How can a girl help a man? Cried Dick angrily. And poor Jaqueline, remembering how she had helped him at the risk of her own life, when King James nearly crushed her in the shape of a mosquito, turned her head away and cried silently. I'm a beast, said Dick. I beg your pardon, Jack dear. You are always a trump, I will say. But I don't see what you can do. Then he told her all of the story, which of course she knew perfectly well already, except the part played by the mosquito, of which he could not be aware. I was sure it was not as bad as you made it out, Dick, she said. You see, the old king, who is not very wise, but is a perfectly honorable gentleman, gave you the highest praise. She thought of lecturing him a little about disobeying his father, but it did not seem like a good opportunity. Besides, Jaqueline had been lectured herself lately, and had not enjoyed it either. What am I to say to Mother? Dick repeated. We must say something, said Jaqueline. Well, I can't tell my mother anything but the truth, Ricardo went on. Here's my hand, how it does sting, and she must find out. I think I can cure it, said Jaqueline. Did you say Prince Charles gave you his own sword? Yes, here it is, but what has that got to do with it? Everything in the world to do with it, my dear Dick. How lucky it was that he gave it to you. And she ran to her own room and brought a golden basket, which contained her medicines. Taking out a small vial marked in letters in emerald, weapon salve. The princess drew the bright sword, extracted a little of the ointment from the vial, and spread it on the soft silk handkerchief. What are you going to do with the sword? Asked Ricardo. Polish it a little, said Jaqueline, smiling, and she began to rub it with the salve and to the point of the rapier. As she did so, Ricardo's arm ceased to hurt, and the look of pain passed from his mouth. Why, I feel quite better, he said. I can use my hand as well as ever. Then he took off the stained handkerchief, and lo, there was not even a mark where the wound had been. For this was the famous weapon salve, which you may have read about in Sir Kingham Digby, and which the Lady of Branksome used in the Lay of the Last Minstrel. But the secret of making it has long been lost, except in Pentuclia. You are the best girl in the world, Jaqueline, he said. You may give me a kiss if you like, and I won't call you Jack, or laugh at you reading books any more. There's something in books, after all. The princess did not take advantage of Dick's permission, but advised him to lie down and try to sleep. I say, though, he said, what about my father? The king need never be told anything about it, said Jaqueline. Need he? Oh, that won't do. I tell my father everything. But then, I never had anything like this to tell him before. Don't you think, Jaqueline, you might break it to him? He's very fond of you. Just tell him what I told you, and it's every word of it's true, and he ought to know. He might see something about it in the Marquis de France. This was the newspaper of the period. I don't think it will get into the papers, said Jaqueline, smiling. Nobody could tell except the king and the princess, and they have reasons for keeping it to themselves. I don't trust that younger one, said Dick moodily. I don't care for that young man. Anyway, my father must be told, and if you won't, I must. Well, I'll tell him, said Jaqueline, and now lie down till evening. After dinner in the conservatory, Jaqueline told King Prigio all about it. His Majesty was very much moved. What extraordinary bad luck that family has, he thought. If I had not changed the rug, the merest accidents, Prince Charles would have dined with St. James tonight, and King George in Hanover. It was the very nearest thing. This meddling with political affairs will never do, he said aloud. Dick has had a lesson, sire, said the princess. He says he'll never mix himself up with politics again, whatever happens. And he says he means to study all about them, for he feels frightfully ignorant, and above all, he means to practice his fencing. These remarks were not part of the conversation between Ricardo and Jaqueline, but she considered that Dick really meant what he said this. Well, that's as well as far as that goes, said the king. But Jaqueline, about that mosquito, for she had told him this part of the adventure. That was a very convenient mosquito, though I don't know how Dick was able to observe it from any distance. I see your hand in that, my dear, and I'm glad you make such a kind and wise use of the lessons from the good fairy Parabenu, Jaqueline, he added solemnly, laying his hand on her head. You have saved the honor of Pantuflia, which is dearer to me than life. Without your help, I tremble to think what might have happened. The princess blushed very much, and felt very happy. Now, run away to the queen, my dear, said his majesty. I want to think things over. He did think them over, and the more he thought, the more he felt the inconvenience attending the possession of fairy things. An eclipse one day, nearly possible as a revolution soon after, he said to himself. But for Jaqueline, Ricardo's conduct would have been blazed abroad. England would have been irritated. It is true she cannot get at Pantuflia very easy, as we have no sea-coast. We are surrounded by friendly countries, but it would have been a ticklish and discreditable position. I must really speak to Dick, which he did the next morning after breakfast. You have broken my rules, Ricardo, he said. There is no great harm done, and you have confessed frankly. But how am I to trust you any longer? I give you my sacred word of honor, father, that I'll never meddle with politics again, or start an expedition without telling you. I've had enough of it, and I'll turn over a new leaf. I've learned to be ashamed of my ignorance, and I've sent for friend Slaza, and I'll fence every day, and read like everything. Very good, said the king. I believe you mean what you say. Now go to your fencing lesson. But I say, father, cried Ricardo, was it not strange about the magic carpet? I told you not to trust these things, said the king. Some enchanter may have deprived it of its power. It may be worn out. Someone may have substituted a common Persian rug. Anything may happen. You must learn to depend on yourself. Now, be off with you. I'm busy. And remember, you don't stir without my permission. The prince ran off, and presently the sounds of stamping feet and "Un, deux, double, desengage, vite, contre de cartes," and so forth might be heard over a great part of the royal establishment. Fencing terms. I know them because I fence. Anyway. Chapter 7. Prince Ricardo and an Old Enemy. There is one brute I wish I could get up sides with. There is one brute I wish I could get up sides with, said Ricardo at breakfast one morning, with a mouthful of sardine. He started for breakfast. Really, Ricardo, your language is most unprincely, said his august father. I'm always noticing it. You mean, I suppose, that there is an enemy in the human race you wish to abolish. What is the name of this doomed foe? He is the greatest villain in history, said Ricardo. You must have read about him, sir. The Yellow Dwarf. Yes, I have certainly studied what is told about him, said the king. He is no favorite of mine. He's only one, if you notice, sir, of all the scoundrels upon whom our ancestors inform us, who escaped the doom which he richly merited at the sword of a good knight. You may remark here that since Dick, to his studies, he could speak when he chose, like a printed book, which was by no means the case before. If you remember, sir, he slew the king of the golden mines and the beautiful though frivolous Princess Frutilla. And that friendly mermaid could do for them was to turn them into a pair of beautiful trees which intertwine their branches. Not much use in that, sir. And nothing's done to the scoundrel. He may be going on still, and with your leave I'd like to go and try to sword thrust with him. Frank Lazare says I'm improving uncommonly. You may take the usual sort of sharpness, said his majesty. What, sir, to a dwarf? Not I. Indeed, a common small sword is good enough to settle him. They say he is cunning of fence, said the king. Besides, I've heard something of a diamond sword which he stole from the king of the golden mines. Very likely he has lost it or sold it, this shabby little miscreant. However, I'll risk it, and now I must make my preparations. The king did not ask what they were. As a rule, they were simple. But being in the shop of the optician that day, standing with his back to the door, he heard Dick come in and order a pair of rose-colored spectacles with which he was once provided. The people of Paranabu were accustomed to wear them, saying that they improved the complexions of ladies whom they met, and added cheerfulness to things in general. Just plain rose-colored glass specs, said Dick. I'm not short-sighted. The boy is beginning to show some sense, said the king to himself, knowing the nature and the difficulties of the expedition. Ricardo did not disguise his intention of taking with him the dandy Denman terrier named Pepper, and the king, who understood the motive of this precaution, silently approved. The lad has come to purpose and forethought, the king said, and he gladly considered a considerable sum for the purchase of crocodile eggs, which can rarely be got quite fresh. When Jaqueline made the crocodile's eggs with millet seed and sugar candy into a cake for the dwarf's lions, Ricardo announced that his preparations were complete. Not that the mere slave of custom, he made this expedition on horseback, and the only magical thing he took with him was a cap of darkness, the one which would not work, but he didn't know that. And he put in his pocket for future use. With plenty of egg sandwiches and marmalade sandwiches, and cold minced scallop sandwiches, he pricked forth into the wilderness, making for the country inhabited by the yellow dwarf. The princess was glad he was riding, for she privately accompanied him in the disguise of a wasp, and a wasp, of course, could not have kept up with him in his 7-league boots. Hang that, Wops, said Prince Ricardo several times, buffeting it with his pocket handkerchief when he buzzed in his ear round the horse's head. Meanwhile, King Prigio had taken the precautions, which were perfectly simple. When he thought Ricardo was getting near the place, he put on his wishing cap and sat down before the magic crystal ball, and kept his eye on the proceedings, being ready to wish the right thing to help Ricardo at the right moment. He left the window wide open, smoked a cigar, and seemed a pattern of the good and wise father watching the conduct of a promising son. The prince rode and rode, sometimes taking up Pepper on his saddle, sometimes passing through the forest, sleeping in lonely inns, forging rivers, till one day he saw that the air was becoming yellow. He knew that this showed the neighborhood of Jonia, or Donia, the country of the yellow dwarf. He therefore drew bridle and placed his rose-colored spectacles on his nose, and put spurs to his horse. For the yellow light of Wania makes people melancholy and cowardly. He pricked on, his horse stumbled and nearly came to its nose. The prince noticed that a steel chain had been drawn across the road. "What caitiff has dared?" he exclaimed, when his hat was knocked off by a well-aimed orange from a neighboring orange tree, and a vulgar voice squeaked, "Hey, blinkers!" There was the yellow dwarf, an odious little figure, sucking orange in the tree, swinging his wooden shoes and grinning all over his wrinkled face. "Well, young blinkers," said the dwarf, "what are you doing on my grounds? You're a prince by your look. Man, down with kings. I'm a man of the people." "You're a dwarf of the worst description, that's what you are," said Ricardo. "And let me catch you, and I'll flog the life of you with my riding whip." The very face of the dwarf, even seen through rose-colored spectacles, made him nearly ill. "Well, yes, you can catch me," said the dwarf. "But that's not today, or nor yet tomorrow. What are you doing here? Are you an ambassador?" Maybe to come to propose a match for me? I'm not proud, I'll hear you. I say there's a rather well-looking wench in your parts, the Princess Jaqueline. Mention that lady's name, you villain, cried Dick, and I'll cut down your orange tree. And he wished he had the sword of sharpness, for you cannot prod down a tree with the point of a rapier. Fancy her yourself, said the dwarf, showing his yellow teeth with a detestable grin, while Ricardo turned quite white with anger, and not knowing how to deal with this insufferable little monster. I'm a widower, I am, said the dwarf, though I'm coming out of mourning, for he wore a dirt clay-colored yellow jacket. My illustrious consorts, the Princess Rutilla, did not behave very nice, and I had to avenge my honor. In fact, I'm open to any offers, however humble. Coming at an alarming sacrifice, come to my box. And he pointed to a filthy clay cottage, all surrounded by thistles, nettles, and black, boggy water. And I'll talk over your proposals. Hold your impudent tongue, said Dick. The Princess Rutilla was an injured saint, and as for the lady whom I shall not name in your polluting presence, I am her knight, and I defy you to deadly combat. We may imagine how glad the princess was, disguised as a wasp, when she heard Dick say that he was her knight. Not that, in fact, he always thought of it before. Oh, you're for a fight, are you? Sneered the dwarf. I might tell you one hit of your own weight, but I'm not afraid of 6 of you. Yeah, mummy's brat. Look here, young blinkers, I don't want to hurt you. Just turn your Dobbin's head and trot back to your mammy, Queen Rosalind at Pantoufla. Does she know you're out? I'll be into you very quick, said Ricardo. But why do you want to do bandy words with a miserable peasant? And don't get much of the best of them either, said the dwarf provokingly. But I'll fight, if you'll have it. The prince leaped from his horse, having Pepper on the saddle-bow. No sooner had he touched the ground than the dwarf shouted, Hi! To him, Billy! To him, Daniel! Hit him! Good lions at him! And with an awful roar, 2 lions rushed from the neighboring potato patch and made for Ricardo. These were not ordinary lions, history averts, each having 2 heads, each being 8 feet high, and 4 rows of teeth, their skin as hard as nails, and bright red like Morocco. The prince did not lose the presence of mind. Hastily he threw the cake of crocodile eggs, millet seed, and candy to the lions. This is a dainty which lions can never resist, and running greedily at it with all 4 tremendous snaps, they got a hold of each by their jaws, and their 8 rows of teeth were locked fast in a grim and deadly struggle for existence. The dwarf took in the affair at a glance. Curse be he who taught you this, he cried, then whistled in a shrill and vulgar manner with his dirty fingers. At this rushed up an enormous Spanish cat, ready and bridled and saddled, with darting fire from its eyes. To leap from its back while Ricardo sprang to his own steed was the active dwarf at work for a moment. Then clapping spurs to its sides, his spurs grew naturally in his bare heels, horrible to relate, kind of like a rooster spurs, and talking to his cat by the head, the dwarf forced it to leap on Ricardo's saddle. The diamond sword which slew the king of the golden mines, that invincible sword which used iron like a reed, was up and flashing in the air. At this very moment, King Prigio, seeing in the magic globe all that passed, was despairing for Ricardo's life, and was just about to wish the dwarf at Jericho, when through the open window, with a tremendous whir, came a huge vulture, and knocking the queen's wishing cap off. Wishing was now of no use. This odious fowl was a fairy of the desert, the dwarf's trusted ally in every sort of mischief. The vulture flew instantly out of the window, and with what anxiety the king turned his eyes on the crystal ball, only a parent's heart can know. Should he see Ricardo bleeding at the feet of the abominable dwarf? The king scarcely dared to look, however, before he had known the nature of fear. However, he did look, and saw the dwarf uncatted, and Pepper, the gallant dandy Daimont, with his teeth at the throat of the monstrous Spanish cat. No sooner had he seen the cat leap on his master's saddlebow than Pepper, true to his instinct of his race, sprang at its neck just behind its head, the usual place, and with an awful and despairing mew, the cat, Peter was its name, gave up its life. 2 bots in a row again. Weird. The dwarf was on his feet in a moment, waving the diamond sword which lighted up the whole scene with yelling taunts. Pepper was flying at his heels, and with great agility was keeping out of the way of the invincible blade. "Ah!" screamed the dwarf as Pepper got hold of him by the ankle. "Go off your dog, you coward, and come off your horse, and fight fair!" At this moment, bleeding yellow blood, dusty mad with pain, the dwarf was a sight to strike terror into the boldest. Dick sprang from his saddle, but so terrific was the appearance of his adversary, and so dazzling was the sheen of the diamond sword, that he put his hand in his pocket and drew out, as he supposed, the sham cap of darkness, and placed it on his head. "Yeah, who's your hatter?" screamed the infuriated dwarf. "I see you!" And he disengaged, fainting in cart, and made a lunge to the second to Dick, which no mortal blade could have parried. The prince, thanks to his excellent training, just succeeded in stepping aside, but the dwarf recovered with astonishing quickness. "Coward, lâchez, poachon, run away!" he hissed through his clenched teeth, and was about to make a thrust and thrice, with which fatality would have been fatal, when the Princess Jaqueline, in her shape as a wasp, stung him fiercely on the wrist. With an oath so awful we dare not set it down, the dwarf dropped the diamond sword, sucked his injured limb, and began hopping about in pain. In a moment, Prince Ricardo's foot was on the blade of the diamond sword, which he passed thrice through the body of the yellow dwarf. Squirming fearfully, the little monster expired. His last look of defiance, the last word was an insult. "Yeah, gig lamps!" Prince Ricardo wiped the diamond blade clean from its yellow stains. "Princess Rutilla is avenged," he cried, then pensively looking at his fallen foe. "Peace to his ashes," he said. "He died in harness." Turning at the word, he observed that the 2 lions were stiff and dead, locked in each other's gory jaws. At that moment, King Prigio, looking at the crystal ball, gave a great sigh of relief. "All's well that ends well," he said, lighting a fresh cigar, for he had allowed the other 2 go out in the excitement. "But it was a fight. I am not satisfied." His Majesty went on reflecting. "The plan of changing the magical articles. The first time was of no great importance, and I could not allow the boy to start an expedition without giving me warning. But in today's affair he owes me his safety entirely to himself and Pepper, for he had not seen the wasp. The fairy of the desert quite baffled me. It was terrible. I shall restore the right things to the fairies tonight. As for the fairy of the desert," he said, forgetting that his wishing cap was on, "I wish you were dead." There's the fairy of the desert. A hollow groan and the sound of a heavy body falling interrupted the king. He looked about the room, but saw nothing. He was alone. "She must have been in the room invisible," said the king, "and, of course, she died in the condition. I must find her body." The king groped about everywhere like a blind man, and at last discovered the dead body of the wicked fairy lying on the sofa. He could not see it, of course, but he felt it with his hands. "This is very awkward," he remarked. "I cannot ring for the servants and make them take her away. This one is only one plan." So he wished that she were in her family pyramid in the Egyptian desert, and a second sofa was unoccupied. "Very dangerous and revengeful enemy now removed from Ricardo's path in life," said His Majesty, and went to dress for dinner. Meanwhile, Ricardo was riding gaily home. The yellow light of Jonia had just vanished, and the pure blue sky broke ahead as soon as the dauntless dwarf had drawn his last breath. The poor, trembling people of the country came out of their huts and accompanied Dick, cheering and throwing roses which had been yellow roses, but blushed red as soon as the dwarf expired. They attended him to the frontiers of Pantuflia, singing his praises, which Ricardo had the new and inestimable pleasure of knowing that he had deserved. It was sharp work, he said to himself, but much more exciting and glorious than the usual business. On his return, Dick did not fail to mention the wasp, and again the king felt how great his debt was to Jaqueline. But they did not think it well to trouble the good queen with the dangers that Dick had encountered. Chapter 8. The Giant Who Does Not Know When He Has Had Enough. One morning the post brought a truly enormous letter for Dick. It was as broad as a tablecloth, and the address was written in letters as long as a hoopstick. "The hand I seem to know," said Ricardo, "but I thought the fingers which held the pen would have long been cold in death." He opened, with a sword, the enormous letter, which was crouched in the following terms. "The giant, as does not know when he has had enough, presents his compliments to Prince Ricardo, and I, having recovered from the effects of our little recent rally, will be happy to meet you in the old place for a return match. I was being rather hasty with the pen. The giant hopes you will excuse the bad writing." The giant is mentioned, and his picture drawn in an old manuscript of about 1875. Dick simply gazed in amazement. "If I ever thought an enemy was killed and done for, it was that giant," said he. "Why, I made minced chops out of him." However, he could not refuse the challenge, not to speak of his duty to rid the world of so greedy and odious a tyrant. Dick, therefore, took the usual things, which the king had secretly restored, but first he tried them, putting on the cap of darkness before a glass in which he could not see himself. On second thoughts, he considered it unfair to take the cap, and the other articles were in the working order. Jaqueline on this occasion followed him overhead in the disguise of a crow, flying above him. On reaching the cavern, a huge tunnel in the rock where the giant lived, Ricardo blew the blast of a horn which hung outside, and, in obedience to a written notice, knocked also with the mace provided by the giant for that purpose. Presently he heard heavy footsteps sounding along the cavern, and the giant came out. He was above the common height for giants, and his whole face and body were seamed over with little red lines, crossing each other like a tartan. These were the marks of encounters, in which he had been cut to bits and come together again, for this was his particularity, which made him very dangerous. If you cut off his head, he went on just as before, only without it, and so everything else. By dint of magic, he could put his head on again, just as if it had been his hat, if you gave him some time. Deadpool was a giant. On the last occasion of their meeting, Ricardo had left him in a painfully scattered condition, and thought he was done for. But now, except for a bird that had flown away with a little finger of his left hand and one of his ears, the giant was as comfortable as anyone could be in this situation. "Morning, sir," he said to Dick, touching his forehead with his hand. "Glad to see you looking well. Not bad feeling, I hope, on the other side." "Oh, not on mine, certainly," said Ricardo, holding out his hand, which the giant took to shake. "But duty is duty, and giants must go. The modern world has no room for them."
"That's hearty," said the giant. "I like a fellow of your kind. Now, shall we toss for corners?"
"All right," said Dick, calling, "Heads," and winning. He took the corner with the sun to his back, and in the giant's face. To it they went, the giant aiming a blow with his club that would have felled an elephant. Dick dodged and cut off the giant's feet at the ankles.
"First blood for the prince," said the giant, coming up smiling. "Half-minute time."
He occupied the half-minute by placing the feet neatly beside each other, as if there had been a pair of boots. Round 2. The giant sparring for wind, Ricardo cuts him in two at the waist. The giant folded his legs up neatly like a pair of trousers and laid them down on a rock. He now had some difficulty in getting rapidly over to the ground, and stood mainly on the defensive, and on his waist. Round 3. Dick bisects the giants. Both sides now attack him on either hand, and the feet kick him severely. "No kicking," said Dick.
"Nonsense, all fair in war,"
said the giant.
"But do not let us praise this sanguinary...
No. But let us not pursue this sanguinary encounter with all its horrible details. Let us also remember, otherwise the sense would be too painful for an elegant mind to contemplate with entertainment, that the giant was in excellent training, and thought no more of a few rounds than you do of a crack on the leg from a cricket ball. He well deserved the title given to him by the fancy of the giant who does not know when he has had enough. The contest was over. Dick was resting on a rock. This was strewn with interesting but imperfect fragments of the giant, when a set of double teeth of enormous size flew up out of the ground and caught Ricardo by the throat. In vain he strove to separate the teeth, when the crow, stooping from the heavens, became the Princess Jaqueline and changed Dick into a wren, a tiny bird, so small it was easy to fly out of the jaws of the giant and wing his way to a tree whence he watched the scene. Ah, but poor Princess Jaqueline. To perform this feat of changing Dick into a bird she had, of course, according to all laws of magic, to resume her own natural form. There she stood, a beautiful, trembling maiden, her hands crossed at her bosom, entirely at the mercy of the giant. No sooner had Dick escaped the monster and began to collect himself, and before Jaqueline could muster strength to run away or summon to her aid the lessons of the Fairy Barapanu, the giant, who never knew when he had enough, was himself again. The boy had climbed up a tree, for giants are no tree climbers, any more than a grizzly bear. But Jaqueline could not climb. She merely stood, pale and trembling. She had saved Dick, but at an enormous sacrifice, for the sword and 7-league boots were lying on the trampled grass. He had not brought the cap of darkness, and in the shape of a wren, of course, he could not carry away the other articles. Dick was rescued, that was all, and the princess had sacrificed herself through her love for him. The giant picked himself up and pulled himself together, as we said, to approach Jaqueline in a very civil way for a person of his breeding, head in hand.
"Let me introduce myself,"
he said, and mentioned his name and titles.
"May I ask what you are doing here, and how you came?"
Poor Jaqueline threw herself at his feet and murmured a short and not very intelligible account of herself.
"I don't understand,"
said the giant, replacing his head on his shoulders.
"Oh, what to do with you, I'm not sure I know. Please don't eat me, did you say? Why, what do you take from me? I'm not of that line at all. No, I call it."
Jaqueline was somewhat comforted by these words, and dropped the sight of the giant's lips from a considerable height. "But they call you the giant who does not know when he has had enough," said Jaqueline.
"And proud of the title, not enough of fighting. Of punishment I'm a glutton, or so my friends are pleased to say. A brace of oxen, drove of sheep or two are enough for me."
The giant went on complacently, but forgetting to mention that the sheep and the oxen were the property of other people.
"Where am I to put you till your friends come and pay you ransom?"
said Giant again, staring at Jaqueline in a perplexed way.
"I can't take you home with me. That is out of the question. I have a little woman of my own, and she's not very fond of other ladies. Especially she would like to poison them that have good looks."
Now Jaqueline saw that the giant, big as he was, and courageous too, was afraid of his wife.
"I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hand you over to a neighbor of mine who is a bachelor."
"A bachelor giant? Well, that's quite proper," said Jaqueline, trying to humor him.
"Oh, he's not a giant, bless you. He's a queer fellow, and it's not easy to say what he is. He's an earthquaker. With him it shakes the earth now and then, and brings the houses of people about their ears."
Jaqueline fairly screamed at hearing this awful news.
"Hush! Be quiet, do," said the giant. You'll bring out my little woman, and she is not easy to satisfy with explanations when she finds me conversing with a lady unbeknown to her. The Earthquaker won't do you any harm. It's only for safekeeping. I'll put you with him. Why, he don't waken once in 50 years. He's quite the dormouse. Turns on his bed now and then, and things upset, more or less. But as a rule, a child could play with him. Come on. Then taking Jaqueline up in one hand, on which she sat as if on a chair, they crossed a few ranges of mountains with many strides. In front of one tall blue hill, with a flattened peak, as they drew near, the princess felt a curious kind of wind coming around her and around her. You have heard of the whirlpools of water. Well, this is kind of a whirlpool of air. Even the giant himself could hardly keep his legs against it. Then he tossed Jaqueline up, and the airy whirlpool seized her and carried her, as if on a tide of water, always round and round in narrowing circles, until she was sucked down to a hollow hill. Even as she went, she seemed to remember the hill, as if she had dreamt about it, and the shape and the color of the country. But presently she sank softly onto a couch, in a beautifully lighted rocky hall. All around her the floor was white and red marble, and on the side it seemed to end in black nothing. Jaqueline, after a few moments, recovered her senses fully, and changed herself into an eagle and tried to fly up and out. But as soon as she was in the funnel, the whirlpool of air, always sucking down and down, was too strong for her wings. She was a prisoner in this great gleaming hall, ending in black nothingness. So she resumed her usual form, and walking on the edge of darkness, she found it was not empty air, but something black, soft, strong, something living. It had no form or shape, or none that she could make out, but it pulsed with a heart. Jaqueline placed her foot on this curious thing, then a voice came out, like thunder heard from a feather bed.
No, not their time to get up.
And then there was a snore, and the great hall rocked like a ship at sea. It was the Earthquaker. The habits of this monstrous animal are very little known, as, of course, he never comes above the ground, or at least very seldom, when he makes tracks like a dry riverbed across country. We're certain that there are earthquakers, otherwise, how can there be earthquakes? But how to tackle an earthquaker, how to get at him, and what to do with him when you've got him, are questions which might puzzle even King Prigio. It is not easy to have the better of an enchantress like Jaqueline and a prince like Ricardo. In no ordinary circumstances could they have been baffled and defeated, but now it must be admitted that they were in a very trying and alarming situation, especially the princess. The worst of it was, as Jaqueline sat and thought, she began to remember that she was back in her own country. The hills were those she used to see in her father's palace windows when she was a child, and she remembered with horror that once a year her people used to send a beautiful girl to the Earthquaker, by way of keeping him quiet, as you shall hear presently. And now she heard light footsteps and sounds of weeping, and lo, a great troop of pretty girls passed, sweeping in and out from the halls, in a kind of procession, and looking unhappy and lost. Jaqueline ran to them. "Where am I? Who are you?" she cried, in the language of her own country, which came back to her on a sudden. "The nurses of the Earthquaker," they said. "Our duty is to sing him to sleep, and every year he must have a new song. And every year a new maiden must be sent down from earth with a new sleepy song she has learned from Princess Manua in the City of the Sun. Are you the new singer?" "No, I'm not," said Jaqueline. "I don't know any of the priests of Manoa. I don't know any of these new sleeping songs. I only want to find a way out." "There is no way, or we should have found it," said one of the maidens. "And if you're a wrong girl, by the day after tomorrow we must send the right one. Otherwise the Earthquaker will waken and shake the world and destroy Manua, the City of the Sun." Then they all wept softly in the stillness. "Can we do anything? Can we get anything to eat here?" asked poor Jaqueline at last. She was beginning to be very hungry, and, however alarmed she might be, she felt that dinner would not be unwelcome. The tallest of the maidens clapped her hands, and immediately a long table was spread by unseen sprites, with meringues and whole chicken and several sorts of delicious ices. We showed dessert to Jaqueline, who was rather less alarmed when she found that she was not to be starved, at all events, and returned to Prince Ricardo, whom we left fluttering about as a little gold-encrusted wren. He followed the giant and Jaqueline into the whirlpool of air as far as he dared. And when he saw her vanish down the cone on the hill, he flew straight back to Pantuflia. Chapter 9. Prigio has an idea. A weary and way-worn little bird was Prince Ricardo when he fluttered into the royal study window in the palace of Pantuflia. The king was out in a council meeting. Knowing that Ricardo had the right things all in right order, he was at least in least anxious. He was not in the least anxious about him. The king was out, but Saramis was in. Saramis, the great gray cat sitting on the big book on top of the library steps. Now, Semiramis was very fond of birds, and no sooner did Ricardo enter and flutter on the table than Semiramis gathered herself together and made one fell spring at him. She just caught his tail feather. In all his adventures, the prince had never been in great danger. He escaped, but no more, and went flying around the ceiling, looking for a safe place. Finally, he perched on the chandelier that hung from the roof. Here he was safe, and so weary was he that he put his head under his wing and fell fast asleep. He was awakened by the return of the king, who threw himself on the sofa and exclaimed, "Oh, that prime minister! His dome is as heavy as lead, much heavier, in fact." Then his majesty lit a cigar and took up a volume. He was certainly a sad book one. Dick now began to fly about the room, brushing the king's face and trying to attract his notice. "Poor little thing," said his majesty, and Dick alighted and settled on his breast. And seeing this, Saramis began to growl as cats do when they're angry, and slowly approached his majesty. "Get out, Saramis," said the king, and lifting her by the neck, he put her out of the room and shut the door, at which she remained, scratching and mewing. Dick now crept out of the royal waistcoat and flew to the king's ear, twittered and pointed out to the window with one claw, and lying down on his back pretended to be dead. Then he got up again, twittered afresh, and pointed to the wishing cap, and finally convinced the king that this was no common fowl. "An enchanted prince or princess," said Prigio, "such as I have often read. Who can it be? Not Jaqueline. She could change herself back in a moment. By the way, where is Jaqueline?" He rang the bell and asked the servant to look for the princess. Saramis tried to come in, but was caught and shut downstairs. After doing this, the man replied that her royal highness had not been in the palace all day. The king rushed to the crystal ball and looked all over the world, but no princess. He became very nervous, and at that moment Dick lighted on the crystal ball and put his claw on the very hill where Jaqueline disappeared. Then he cocked his little eye at the king. "Nay, she is somewhere in the unknown center of South America," said his majesty. "Somewhere behind Mount Verona, where nobody has ever seen. I must look into this." Then he put on his wishing cap and wished that the bird would assume his natural shape, and if he was under enchantment, there seemed to be a good reason to believe. Instantly, Dick stood before him. "Ricardo!" cried his king in horror. "And in this disguise, where have you been? What have you done with Jaqueline? Where are the 7-league boots? Where is the sword of sharpness? Speak! Get up!" For Dick was kneeling, weeping bitterly at his royal feet. "Oh, law," said Dick. "Poor Jaqueline, she was the best girl and the prettiest and the kindest, and the earthquakers got her, and the giants got the other things." Dick grinned, crying bitterly. "Calm yourself, Ricardo," said his majesty, very pale, but calm and determined. "Here, take a glass of port and explain how all this happened." Dick drank the wine, and then told of his miserable story. "You may very well sob. You didn't use a cap of darkness. Mere conceit. But there is no use crying over spilt milk. The thing is to rescue Jaqueline. And what are we to say to your mother?" "That's the worst of all," said Dick. "Mother will break her heart."
must see to her at once, said the king, and break it to her.
This was a terrible task.
The queen had just confidence in her Prigio that as soon as she dried her tears, remarking that heaven would not desert Jaqueline, that the king would find a way out of this trouble. His Majesty retired to his study and put his head in his hands and thought and thought. The thing is, of course, he said, to destroy the Earthquaker before he awakens. But how? What can kill such a monster? Parting him with a sword would only stir him and make him more vicious. And I know of no other beast that can set against him, as I did with the fire beast and the ice beast when I was young. Oh, for an idea! Then his mind somehow went back to the council and the ponderous stupidity of the prime minister. Heavier than lead, said the king. By George, I have a plan. If I could get to a place where they keep the stupidity, I could carry it away enough to flatten the Earthquaker. Then he remembered how, in an old Italian poem, he had read about all the strange lumber room of odd things which is kept in the moon. That is the advantage of reading. Knowledge is power. And you mostly get knowledge that is really worth having out of good old books, which people do not usually need. If the stupidity is kept in stock up on the moon and comes to here, falling naturally down on Earth in small quantities, I might obtain enough for my purpose, thought the king. But how to get to the moon? There are difficulties about that. But difficulties only sharpened the ingenuity of this admirable king. The other fellow had a flying horse, said he. By the other fellow, Prince Prigio means the Italian knight, Astolfo, who in old times visited the moon, and there found and brought back the common sense to his friend Orlando, as you may read in the poem of Aristotle. Now, reasoned King Prigio, if there's a flying horse at all, it is in the stables of the King of Delhi. I must look into this. Taking the magic spyglass, the king surveyed the world from China to Peru, and sure enough, there was a famous flying horse in the king's stable at Delhi. Hastily the king thrust his feet into the shoes of swiftness, so hastily indeed that, as the poet said, he madly crammed his left-hand foot into the right-hand shoe. But this, as many people think, is a sign of good luck. Then he put the shoes on the proper feet, and in a few minutes he was in the presence of the great mogul. The monarch received him with some surprise, but with stately kindness, and listened to Prigio while he explained what was happened.
I am only too happy to assist your adventurous prince, remarked the great mogul. This is like old times. Every horse in my stable is at your service, but, as you say, only the flying horse is of any use to you in this expedition.
He clapped his hands, and the Grand Vizier appeared, and the king gave orders to have the flying horse saddled at once. Then he presented Prigio with a large diamond, and came down to the courtyard to see him off.
He's fresh, said the groom who held the bridle. He has not been out of the stable for 300 years.
Prigio sprang into the saddle among the salams, and of the dusky multitude, and all the ladies of the Seraglio waved their scented handkerchiefs out of the windows. The king, as had been instructed, turned a gold knob on the saddle of the flying horse, then kissed his hands to the ladies, and giving the steed his head, cried, in excellent Persian, "To the moon!" Up flew the horse as an easy action, and the king's head nearly swam with the swiftness of the flight. Soon the earth below him was no bigger than a top, spinning on its own axis. See geography books for this. And, as night fell, the earth was only a great red moon. Through the night rode King Prigio, until the silver dawn of the moon. And now all became clear and silvery. The coast of the moon came into sight, with white seas breaking on them, and at last the king reached the silver walls and the great gate of opal. Before the gate stood two beautiful ladies. One was fair with yellow locks, the color of the harvest moon. She wore a crown of golden snake and white water lilies, and her dress now shone white, now red, now golden. In her hand was a golden pitcher that sheds the dew, and a golden wand. The other lady was as dark as night, dark eyes, dark hair. Her crown was of poppies. She held an ebony wand of sleep, Her dress was the deepest blue, sewn with stars. The king knew that they were the maidens of the bright and the dark side of the moon, as you see the side, and of the side that no one has ever seen, except King Prigio. He stopped the flying horse, and turning the other knob in the saddle, alighted and bowed very low to each of the ladies. "Daring mortal, what make you here?" they asked. And the king told them about Jaqueline and the Earthquaker, and how he needed the great weight of stupidity to flatten him out with. The ladies heard him in silence. Then they said, "Follow us." And they flew lightly beside the flying horse, till they had crossed the bright side of the moon, above the silver palaces and silver seas, and reached the summit of the mountains of the moon, which separate the bright from the dark side. "I may go no further," said the bright lady, "and beyond all you see all is darkness and heavy sleep." Then she touched Prigio with her golden wand with twisted serpents, and he became luminous, light raying out of him. And the dark lady, too, shone like silver in the night, and on they flew over black rocks and black rivers till they reached a huge mountain, like a mountain of coal, many 1,000 feet high, for its head was lost in the darkness. Dark Moon Lady struck the rock with her ebony wand and said, "Open!" And the cliffs opened like a door, and there were within the mountain. "Here," said the Dark Lady, "is storehouse of all the stupidity. Hence it descends like showers, like stardust on the earth, whenever this mountain, which is a volcano, is an eruption. Only a little of the stupidity reaches her, and that is only invisible dust. Yet you know how weighty it is, even in that form." "Indeed, madam," said the king, "no one knows it better than I do." "Then make your choice of the best sort of stupidity for your purpose," said the Dark Lady. And in the light which flowed from their bodies, King Prigio looked at the various kinds of solid stupidity. There it lay in masses: the stupidity of bad sermons, the ignorant reviewers, the bad poems, the bad speeches, dreary novels, foolish statesmen, ignorant mobs, fine ladies, and idle naughty boys and girls. The king examined all of them, and all were very, very heavy. But when he came to the stupidity of the learned, the dull, blind writers on Shakespeare and Homer and the Bible, then King Prigio saw that he had found the sort he wanted, and that a very little of it would go a long way. He could never have got it in the saddle of the flying horse if the Dark Lady had not touched it with her ebony wand, and made it light to carry till it was wanted for its purpose. When he needed to use for it, he was to utter a certain spell which she taught him, and then the lump would recover its natural weight. So easily he put the great block on his saddle-bow, and the Dark Lady flew back to reach the crest of the mountains of the moon. There she touched him with her ebony wand, and the silver light which the lady had shed on him died from his face and body, and he became like any other man. "You see your way," said the Dark Lady, pointing to the bright moon of earth, and shining far off in the heavens. Then he knelt down and thanked her, and murmured strange words of blessing which he did not understand, but her face was brave and kind, and he thought of Queen Rosalind, his wife. Then he jumped on the flying horse, and galloped down and down till he reached the palace gate. He called for Ricardo, and set him behind him on the saddle, and away they rode above the land and the wide seas till they saw the crest of the hollow hill, where Jaqueline was with the Earthquaker. Beyond it they marked the glittering spires and towers of Mantua, the city of the sun. And thither, said King Prigio, who had been explaining how matters stood, to Ricardo, we must ride, for I believe they stand in great need of our assistance. "We'd better not go to Jaqueline first, sir," said Ricardo. "No, I think mine is the best plan. Manoa, whose golden spires and pinnacles are shining below us, in the city of the sun, which Sir Walter Raleigh and the Spaniards could never find, so that man doubted its existence. We are needed here to judge that by the angry crowd in the marketplace. Oh, how they howl. The king of the sun is Eldorado, apparently. Anyway, Boardhead pause adds once. So, we are going to go ahead, maybe take a little bit longer break because I need to recover a little. So, I will see you in a bit. Welcome back, everyone. Hope the ads weren't too much punishment. I've been noticing more and more they don't do full screen ads. They've been doing the ones above chat. So that just means you get to sit around and listen to the music, I guess. Did I have music playing? I didn't hear any. Hold on. Do I have music? Okay, I need better music. It just has some mystery music playing, and it was turned way down. So I'm sorry you didn't get to hear music. But you did get to watch the cat. Not that she's doing a lot of energetic things right now, because she's just curled up sleeping. But that's what cats do. That is what they normally do. That is what I wish they would let me do. But anyway. The Kingdom of the Sun. Manoa. That's what Sir Roy Scott and the Spaniards were trying to find. So, City of Gold? Oh no! This is the last chapter. How could that be? Great googly moogly. This is the last chapter of Prince Ricardo. Chapter 10. The End. It was a strange sight when the king and Ricardo looked down from the flying horse. Beneath them lay the city of Manoa, filled with golden battlements and temples of the hollow of the ground of Manoa. Beneath them lay the city of Manoa, filling with its golden battlements and temples the hollow of a mountain. Here were the palaces all carved over with faces of men and beasts, with twisted patterns of serpents. The city walls were built of huge square stones, and among the groves towered pyramids, on which the people did their service to their gods. From every temple top came the roar of beaten drums, great drums of serpent skin. But in the center of the chief square of the town was gathered a wild crowd of men in shining copper armor and helmets of gold, and glittering dresses with feathers. Among them ran about priests with hideous masks, crying on to besiege and break down the royal palace. From the battlements of the palace, the king's guardsmen were firing arrows and throwing spears. The mob shot arrows back, some of them tipped with leaded straw, to burn the palace down. But from the very center of the square was a clear space of ground, on which fell the shadow of a tall column of red stone, all carved with serpents and the faces of gods. Beside it stood a horrible figure to see, a man clothed in serpent skins, whose face was the grinning face of a skull, but the skull was shining black and red in patches. A long white beard flowed from beneath it. This man, mounted on a kind of altar of red stone, waved his hand and yelled, and seemed to point to the shadow on the column which fell across the square. The people were so furious and so eager that they did not at first notice King Prigio as he slowly descended. But at last the eyes within the skull looked up and saw him, and then the man gave a great cry and rent its glittering dress of serpent skin, and held up his hands. Then a multitude looked up, and seeing the flying horse, let their weapons fall, and the man of the skull tore it from his face, and knelt before King Prigio, with his head in the dust. "Thou hast come now, Pachacamac, as foretold in the prophecy of the quote of Venerable Knots. Thou hast come, and behold the shadow of the stone. Thou art too late, O Lord of earth and sea." Then he pointed it to the shadow, which, naturally, was growing shorter, as the sun drew near the midday. He spoke in the language of the ancient Incas of Peru, which, of course, Prigio knew very well. And he was also the Pachacamac, was the god of the people. "I have come," said Prigio, with presence of mind, "as it was been prophesied as it was been prophesied of old. Riding on a beast that flies, said the old priest, even as the great oracle declared. Lord to Pachacamac, even though we die today. In what way can I help my people? Said Prigio. Thou knowest, why should we instruct thee? Thou knowest that on Midsummer Day every year, before the shadow shrinks back to the base of Huaca of Manua, the sacred stone, we must offer a maiden to lull the earthquaker with a new song. Lo, now the shadow shrinks to the foot of Hanoka, and the maiden is not offered. For the lot fell on the daughter of thy servant Inca, and he refuses to give her up. One daughter of his, he says, has been sacrificed to the sacred birds, the Kunthers. The birds were found slain on a hilltop. No man knows, but then the maiden vanished. Why, it must have been Jaqueline. I killed the birds, said Ricardo to Pentherton. Silence, not a word, said the king sternly. And what makes you bear arms against the Inca? He asked the old man. We would slay him and her, answered the priest. But when the shadow shrinks to the foot of the stone, the sun will shine straight down to the hollow hill of the earthquaker, and he will waken and destroy Manua and the temples of the sun. And wherefore would thou slay him when you must all perish? O people, O Pachamatak, would have revenge before they die. Oh, folly of men, said the king solemnly, and then he cried, Lead me to the Inca. This day you shall not perish. It is not predicted in the code of venerable knots that I shall not slay this monster. There is no Pachacamac. For the shadow shortens, said the priest. Lead me to the Inca, answered Prigio. At this time the people rose with a great shout, for they too had been kneeling, and sending a flag of truce before King Prigio, the priest led him to the palace. The ground was strewn with bodies of the slain, and through them Prigio rides slowly into the courtyard, where the Inca was sitting in the dust, weeping and throwing ashes on his long hair and his golden raiment. The king bade the priest remain outside the palace gates, and dismounted, and advancing to the Inca he raised him and embraced him. I come, a king to a king, he said. My cousin, take courage, your sorrows are ended. If I do not slay the earthquaker, sacrifice me to your gods. The prophecy is fulfilled, said the Inca, and he wept for joy. Yet thou must hasten, for it draws near to noon. Then Prigio went up to the golden battlements, and saying no word, he waved his hand. In a moment the square was empty, for the people rushed to give thanks at the temples. Wait my coming, my cousin, said Prigio to the Inca. I shall bring you back the daughter that was lost, when I have slain your enemy. The Inca would have knelt at his feet, but the king raised him, and bade him prepare such a feast as had never been seen in Manua. The lost are found today, he said. Be ready to welcome them. Then, mounting the flying horse, with Dick beside him, he rose towards a peak of the hill where the earthquaker had his home. Already the ground was beginning to tremble, and the earthquaker was stirring in his sleep, for the maiden of new song had not been sent to him. And the year ended at noon, and then he would rise and rule at Manua. The sun was approaching midday, and Prigio put spurs to the flying horse. 10 minutes more, and the sun would look straight down the crater of the hollow hill, and the earthquaker would rouse himself in the light the heat he felt on his body. Already the light of the sun shone slanting halfway down the hollow cone as a whirlpool of air caught the flying horse and drew him swiftly down and down into the shadowy halls. There knelt and wept the nurses of the earthquaker on the marble floor, but Jaqueline stood a little apart, very pale, but not weeping. Ricardo had leaped off before the horse touched the ground and rushed to Jaqueline and embraced her in his arms. And oh, how glad she was to see him, so that she was quite forgot her anger and laughed for joy. "Oh, you've come! I knew you would come!" she cried. Then King Prigio advanced, and the mighty weight of his hand to the verge of the dreadful gulf of the earthquaker, The dim walls grew radiant, and a long slant of yellow light touched the black back of the Earthquaker, and a thrill went through him and shook the world, so that far away the bells rang in Pantufia. A moment more and he would awaken in his strength, and once awake he would shatter the city walls and ruin Manua. Even now the great mass of rock fell from the roof deep down in the secret caves and broke into flying fragments, and all the echoes roared and sang. King Prigio stood with a mighty mass poised in his hands. "Die!" he cried, and uttered the words of the power and the magic spell the dark moon lady had taught him. Then all its invisible natural weight came into the mass which the king held, and down shot the body of the Earthquaker. And where it had been was nothing but a vast abyss, empty, silent, and blank, and bottomless. Far, far below, thousands of miles below, in the very center of the earth, lay the dead Earthquaker, crushed flat as a sheet of paper, and the sun of midsummer day shone straight down on that dreadful chasm, and could not waken him any more forever. The king drew a long breath. "Stupidity has saved the world," he said. With only strength to draw back one step from the abyss, he fell down, hiding his face in his hands. But Jaqueline's arms were around his neck, and the maidens brought him water from the ice-cold spring, and soon King Prigio was himself again, and ready for anything. But afterwards he used to say that the moment when the Earthquaker stirred was the most dreadful in his life. Now in Manua, where all the firm foundations of the city had trembled once, when the sun just touched the Earthquaker, the people seemed the shadow of the sacred column had crept to its foot, and yet Manua stood firm again, and the temple of the sun was not overthrown. Raised such a cry that it echoed even through the halls within the hollow hill. Who shall describe the joy of the maidens, and how often Jaqueline and Ricardo kissed each other? "You have saved me!" she cried to the king, throwing her arms round him again. "You have saved Manua!" "And you have saved the Prince of Pantuflia, not once or twice," said Majesty. And he told Dick how much he had owed to Jaqueline in the fight with the Yellow Dwarf and the fight with the giant, and he did not think it necessary to mention the affair at Rome. Then Dick kissed Jaqueline again, and all the maidens kissed each other, and they were quite cried for gladness. "But we keep his Majesty the Inca waiting," said Prigio. "Punctuality is the courtesy of kings. You ladies will excuse me. I am sure if I remove first to the dungeon her whom we call Princess Jaqueline, the Inca, her father, has a claim on us to preference." Then, placing Jaqueline on the saddle and leaving Dick to comfort the other young ladies, who were still rather nervous, the king flew off to Manua, for the wind, of course, died with the death of the Earthquaker. I cannot tell you the delight of all Manua and of the Inca when they saw the flying horse returning, and recognized their long-lost princess, who rushed into the arms of her father. They beat the serpent drums, for they had no bells on the tops of the temples. They went quite mad with delight. Enemies kissed in the streets, and all the parents, without exception, allowed the young people who happened to be in love to be married the very day. Then Prigio brought back all the maidens, one after the other, and Dick last, as he fell at the Inca's feet and requested leave to marry Jaqueline. But before that could be done, King Prigio mounted on the palace balcony and made a long and very lucid speech to the assembled people. He began by explaining that he was not their god, Pachacamac, but king of a powerful country of which they had never heard before, as they lived very much withdrawn in an unknown region of the world. Then he pointed out, in the most considerate manner, that the religion was not all he would wish, otherwise they could never sacrifice young ladies to wild birds and earthquakers. Next he sketched out the merits of his own creed, that of the Lutheran Church. And the Inca straightway observed that he was proposed to establish it at Manoa at once. Lutheran. Some objection was raised by the old priest in the skull mask, but when the Inca promised to make him an archbishop and to continue all his revenues, the priest admitted that he was perfectly satisfied, and the general public cheered and waved their hats with emotion. It was arranged that the Inca, with his other daughters, should visit Pantuflia immediately, both because he could not bear to leave Jaqueline, and also because there were a few points on which he felt that he still needed information. The government was left in the hands of the Archbishop, who began at once burning all his skull mask. You may not see one, and yeah, you may see one like it in the British Museum and the Mexican one. And by letting loose all the birds and beasts which the Minoans had used for worship. So all the young people were married in the Golden Temple of the Sun, and all the Earthquakers' nurses, who were under 30, were wed to the young men who had been fond of them before they were sent to the Hollow Hill. These young men had never cared for anyone else. Everybody wore bridal favors, and all unengaged ladies acted as bridesmaids, and such a throwing of rice and old shoes was seldom been witnessed. As for the happy royal pair, with their fathers and the other princess, who did not happen to be engaged, back they flew to Pantuflia. And there was Queen Rosalind, waiting at the palace gates, crying and laughing with pleasure when she heard that the wish of her heart was fulfilled, and Jaqueline was to be her daughter. And as for the Earthquaker, said Her Majesty, I never was really anxious in the least, for I knew no beast in the world was a match for you, dear. So, just to make everything orderly and correct, Ricardo and Jaqueline married, over again, in the Cathedral of Pantuflia. The marriage presents came in afterwards, of course. Among them, what do you think? Why, the 7-league boots, the sword of sharpness, with a very polite note of extraordinary size.
The giant who does not know when he has had enough presents his hearty congratulations to the royal pair, and begs to lay at their feet the 7-league boots, as they don't fit me, and the sword which Prince Ricardo left in the giant's keeping recently. The giant hopes no bad blood, and I am, yours faithfully, the giant, etc. P.S. The little woman sends her congratulations.
You see, the giant was not such a bad sort of fellow after all, and Prince Ricardo always admitted that he never met a fellow more gallant and good-humored. With such a clever wife, Ricardo easily passed all his examinations, and his little son, Prince Prigio, named an august grandfather, never had to cry, "Mama, Mama, father's plucked again." So they lived happily in a happy country, occasionally visiting Manoa, and as they progressed the magical water of life from the Fountain of Lions, I do not believe that any of them ever died at all, but that Prigio is still the king of Pantuflia. No need for such kings to ever die. Well, that ends the story of Prince Ricardo. That we know. He may show up at other sources. But anyway, I don't want to start another story. With only half an hour left. So, let's see who we could raid. Let's see, I know Dusk is on. Let's see, Dusk is on. Waste is still on. Waste is on. Let me look at something real quick. I think I've rated Waste for a while. It usually streams before me. 2 weeks ago. Okay, well, anyway. Followers, subscribers, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Do we have anyone left in chat to raid? Let's see if anyone shows on it. Otherwise, hope you all have a wonderful night.